Welcome to Norse Code, the #1 podcast for your Minnesota Vikings. I am your host and producer. I am James Spagashnik. Thank you guys so much for listening. And on the other end of the tin cannon string, we have our analyst and co-host. You know him from numerous blogs and podcasts, most notably from theathletic.com. He is Mr. Arif Hassan. Arif, how you doing tonight?
Terribly. How are you?
I am, well, I'm not doing this one sober, as is tradition, for the end of year show. Or New Year's show. It's really just depends on when the Vikings crap the bed. But this is the end of the season, and as is tradition, it's much like it feels much like the end of the Canadian wedding episode of South Park. There's a lot of tradition going around here, and sadly, the Vikings did not win their must-win game, and as a result, this is the final Vikings game of the year that we get to review.
Yeah, that's great. Stick around, guys.
Pretty much. As such, this is our yearly reminder that this will be the last show for just a little bit. We'll likely be back to the once a week or once every 2 weeks schedule for a little while, and then as the off-season turns more into a desert and we are searching for any little bit of news, it will end up kind of decreasing from there and then speeding up closer to the draft and closer to July. So we're in for a few less episodes. It's a sad thing. I like talking to Arif. I do, despite his indifference towards me. I do enjoy doing this show. So. Relative indifference anyway, but again, really do appreciate your guys' support through the years. We could not do this show without you. Again, thanks so much. If you would like to donate to the show, if you hear value in what we are putting out, you can do so at paypal.me/NorseCode, or you can go to patreon.com/NorseCode and donate there. I just released an episode to all people who are donating to our Patreon for our final clip show of the year. I may end up releasing that in like April when we are trying to do a show, but there's just no news. So I may release that to the general public, but for right now, if you would like to hear outtakes, including a discussion on the Cars universe, and if you want to hear a discussion, well, if you want to hear the original intended opening of the original New York show, you can hear that there as well. This... Boy,
I totally forgot that we covered the extended Cars universe.
I had to cut part of that. It went punny and wrong at the end, but it was quite good.
Don't say. All right.
There was it's quite a fun little additional clip show. But if you would like to hear that, you can go to patreon.com/NorseCode and donate there. So we have the link up. In there. So, however, that's it for donations and everything good and positive in this world. I suppose what we should do is go through the show title suggestions that I asked for immediately after the game. And I'm not even going to include people's names that had submitted these. Just these are the show title suggestions. Not sure which one we're going to go with, or if we're going to end up going with something else. I'm suggesting Bye Bye Cooter, because Jim Bob Cooter was released today, despite the fact that the offense for the Lions ended up putting 31 points up on the board in their blanking of Green Bay, which might be a record, if I'm not mistaken, as far as
most points scored by a coordinator fired immediately after the fact.
Yeah,
something like
that has to be close to the record, if nothing else.
But in fairness, Matt Prater did score some of that's the special teams coach, right?
Oh, I suppose. Prater did not do terribly. So here's our show title suggestions. Season of Optimism, Never Again. Hope is for Fools. Yeah.
Oldie but goodie, I think.
Yeah. 2 more years guaranteed.
It's a deep cut. Not a deep cut. It cuts deep. Maybe that.
It cuts deep, yeah. Is it too late to challenge? Boy.
I like that. That's got some anger in it.
If I
they succeeded though, so it's okay.
if I had a hat on at the time that challenge came out, it would have been thrown hard toward the TV at that point. There are bad.
Actually, I need to tell this story about this right before we get into the rest of these great titles. So people who follow me know that I'm like a huge political junkie. I used to work in politics. I did a bunch of academic debate in high school and college, and so I've got a lot of feelings about politics. Obviously, I mean, sometimes it comes out in the show. I had a political podcast for a while, but one of the things that comes up is discussion of things like the nature of political capital, which is a political theory about kind of how much influence you have in Washington. One of the godfathers of modern political science, one of the people who advanced the notion of political capital as a concept, is a political scientist named Norm Ornstein. He's one of the most influential figures in modern political science. He also happens to be a Minnesota native and is a fan of the Vikings. So when that challenge flag went out and canceled the quarterback sneak on 4th and 1, one of the few quarterback sneaks we've had all season that didn't occur on like second down, and it was successful. When that challenge flag came out, I just threw out this is like a hilarious, because I had turned the corner into like morbid fascination. This is all gallows humor to me at this point, because it was clear that like the Vikings were just going to continue making mistakes throughout the game. And so I was like, this is hilarious, right? I was like, Lamau, and Norm Ornstein quote tweets me and says, "I am not laughing." I was like, oh, my God, I pissed off one of my heroes. This is one of the greatest days of my life.
And it wasn't even technically my fault. It was the Vikings that did it.
You're right. It's so good.
I feel like it's combining. It's the chocolate and peanut butter aspect of life. Like,
you're right, yeah.
Yeah, like, wow, not only does he follow the Vikings, he follows me on Twitter and just completely disagree. That's like the whole, I am not amused thing from the Queen. Like,
right, yeah.
That's fantastic. There are bad days, and then there's today. Having hope was your own damn fault.
Is that a Kyle Seagal special?
Yeah, there's another word at the end of that I'm not going to touch.
Yeah, that's fair.
Wide Trubisky.
Oh, okay.
Zim Weepers.
That's good. I like that one a lot, especially because the Sports Illustrated story came out by Greg Bishop that points out that Zimmer actually has, or somewhere in the Vikings facility, there is actually a banner or a sign that says Zim Reapers on it, which I didn't know. But I guess the Mike Zimmer Foundation has shirts too, so that really fits. So I guess that was the chosen name for a defense that, had they won a Super Bowl, would have had a really nice nickname.
Yeah.
So I like Zim Weepers.
Yeah. Expected nothing. Still disappointed. That I'm leaning toward that one right now. Trubisky throws the Bears into the playoffs and left the Vikings in the dust. The shorter version of that is, of course, Trubisky throws, left Vikings in the dust.
That's good.
Here's a throwback to earlier this year. When the punter is your only MVP / only good player.
I like that.
It seemed inevitable, didn't it? The night Trubisky burned Arif Hassan NFL's brand to the ground.
Bears fans seem to think so.
Yeah. And Mellon, Collie and the infinite badness.
So I swear to God that we had a show title like this. So I searched Norse code and infinite badness, which in retrospect, I'm really happy I didn't get a bunch of results. But no, we had like a black hole of infinite badness in season 1 of Norse Code. So not quite. So this is pretty close to a previous show title we had. Mm-hmm. And always love a reference to 90s music. So it's a good one too.
It works. And then we have, it wasn't actually a title, but Isaac Huntley proceeded to say that it was a little rich to be asking for titles in his opinion.
That's good.
That I liked that. That was quite good actually. So I'm not even entirely sure where to start. So let's start at the beginning. Why does God hate us, Arif?
Because we're Vikings fans.
Yeah. I was trying to get people to like just embrace the whole nihilism aspect of things, but boy, it didn't hurt the way that the Eagles' loss did. But it really just did feel like more of the same. Like this is
I think it's definitely and I think that's why it didn't hurt in quite the same way, right? Mm-hmm. Because this is something that we saw it coming for weeks, right? The Vikings have been underperforming all year. They would need to overcome pretty significant odds to make it into the playoffs at all. They need to come out big in week 17, and they'd just been crapping the bed for a long time, and they'd fired an offensive coordinator already in the season. So it was a different kind of, and it was much easier, I think, to turn to gallows humor during the game, which is what I did, than I think this loss to the Eagles, where the Vikings, I don't know, what did Bill Simmons say in his like levels of losing article way back when, which is, I still reference it on this podcast like once a year, which tells you a lot about the Vikings.
At least once.
At least once, honestly, yeah. Which is that the Vikings are the worst team to cheer for, not like the Browns, not the Bills or anything like that. They're the worst team to cheer for because they find a way to convince you to get your guard down. And they did that in such magnificent fashion last year. Just like, holy crap, this is a team of destiny. They went 13-3, one of the best records that they've had since 1998, which maybe that's a sign. I mean, they were magical, right? They had a play called the Minneapolis Miracle, right? Which the name of the play was like 7 Heaven. Like, are you kidding me? It seemed destined. And so that's why coming out flat against the Eagles was such a punch in the gut. Like, it's this short, sharp pain that ends up leading to, I think, kind of actual melancholy kind of down the road as the week progressed. And then, of course, the Eagles get to play the Super Bowl in Minneapolis, in the stadium. So like there was a lot there. In this game, it was just like, yeah, well, of course, which is just a different kind of, you've disappointed me like always.
It felt more like a greatest hits of the Vikings this year as far as their failures. Anywhere from the sputtering of the offense in the first three or four drives, the short passes, the confusion, the breaking under pressure, the defense coming alive, the offense starting to get something going, and then sputtering out again and being unable to do a damn thing. And then the defense breaks.
Right. I mean, there's so many things that are just like exaggerated versions of the problems that had been kind of there throughout the entire season, and not even just like surface level stuff, which I'll talk about in a second, but also like you take a look at the advanced statistics and it's like, oh, these are exaggerated versions of the problems they've had all season. The Vikings in week 15 and week 16 had play action on 36% or 32% and 40%. So 32% and 40% of their dropbacks, against the Lions and the Dolphins. And that worked spectacularly. It worked wonderfully, right? And it was a refreshing change from what they'd been doing all season. 18.6% ranked 28th in play action usage all year, despite having one of the best play action quarterbacks in the NFL. In this game, they had like a 15% play action usage, which I understand kind of late in the game, you have to pass, so there's no threat of the run, so play action doesn't make sense, but you'd still expect it to be, kind of a little bit more, right? So there's that. So that's kind of an advanced statistic, right? This is one of the few games that, despite being under pressure kind of all year, this is one of the few games where Kirk Cousins actually had more snaps under pressure than he didn't, something like a 55% pressure rate. Like, of course he did. Like, what else would you expect in like a critical Vikings game, right? For the offensive line to give up, so much pressure that, the traditional 40% threshold that Sam Monson or Pro Football Focus sets for offensive lines, that doesn't even matter. You've blown way past it. It's 55%, right? So even the advanced stats were exaggerated versions, but like just the mess ups in game. I mean, the referee has the number of timeouts wrong, right? Like, of course he does. The officiating in the game both ways was pretty bad. I mean, the Vikings' only score was because the referee helped march them down the field. Like, and as somebody who tries like a lot to not be biased when I'm talking about referees and say, the Vikings, they get screwed by the referees more often. I don't think that's true. But in this game, like, everybody was screwed by the referees and nobody was happy. Like, just incredible. And then you've got, like, they successfully do a quarterback sneak finally on 3rd or 4th down. Oh, nope, never mind. That never happened. You call a challenge. Like, it's miraculous that the next play wasn't a fumble, right? Like, that would have been.
And that was my whole thing. It was just like, just kick it here. Don't pass it, don't run it, just kick it, because at least you're used to missing kicks this year.
Right, yeah. I guess that's the only thing, right? That like the Vikings weren't in a close enough situation where a kicker could screw it up, so Dan Bailey was safe to make all of his kicks again. Like, that's really the only thing that wasn't such a classical Vikings thing, especially for this year. But like everything else, right? Like, just mismanagement of the clock. Like, the defense did a pretty decent job at preventing points. But they still like allowed like a 9-minute drive. Like, good job, you prevented points. But they had like 5 first downs on a drive. Like, that's usually not possible, right? So they had a bunch of penalties to extend 3rd downs. Xavier Rhodes goes out, so they pick on Holton Hill. And despite having a good game, he had a bad game. Like, it's just such a Vikings thing, right? So there were some individually good performances. Danielle Hunter played well. Mackenzie Alexander played well. Dalvin Cook played well for what it's worth, given kind of the few opportunities that he had to play well. But, for the most part, it was just a kick in the teeth.
Yeah, it was unpleasant, and it just kept going, but not in the same way that the Eagles game was, where it was just piling on, and really felt a bit like the torture scene in Reservoir Dogs, whereas this was just like anger-inducing. Just, oh my God, this is going to happen again. Oh, hey, they just started scoring again, so I can't wait for them to find a way to extinguish this flame of hope. Oh, yep, done. We're good.
I have to imagine that watching this game is similar to the feeling of bailing your kid out of jail for the 6th time. Like, I don't even have the energy to be disappointed or angry.
It's 4 a.m., the snow is falling, I'm cold, and that bail bondsman was a dick.
Exactly, right.
That is...
I can't. This team is so brutal sometimes. But yeah, I mean, if we wanted to evaluate it like analytically, like, yeah, I mean, there are some good performances, but even guys I've been defending, like Anthony Barr, for example, I've been defending him all year. Except, with regards to the Pro Bowl, I didn't think he deserved necessarily that vote over some, more deserving candidates like Leighton Vander Esch, whatever. He was a good linebacker this year, and he had the worst game of the season. And of course it was week 17. So like, there's the play where he's the spy in Mitchell Trubisky, which, is a fairly normal thing, right? You put your most athletic linebacker who's bigger than the quarterback on the quarterback as a spy. And he just gets like juked out of his shoes, but it doesn't even look like that, right? It looks like his feet are stuck in mud. Like, whoa, of course that happened, right? He misses tackles in the run game and so on. Harrison Smith is playing pretty bad. Like, I even had a comment in my article saying, oh, you didn't even mention that Harrison Smith played awfully this year, which he didn't. He played really well. He didn't play as well as last year. He played really well. But he got torched in this game by Kevin White. Christ, man, really? So, great. Linval Joseph showed up. Danielle Hunter played well. Mackenzie Alexander improbably is like one of the best nickel corners over the second half of the season. And that's not even like he's 5th in yards per cover snap allowed, despite how often he's been targeted. Like, he's been great. And he plays really well in this game. And it's like, I would have taken the reverse of all of this. I would have taken a great game, like a bad game from Danielle Hunter and Mackenzie Alexander, and great games from friggin' everyone else, right? But no, this is what you get. So yeah, I mean, there's like some positive takeaways in terms of the individual performance in that game, but it doesn't matter, right? Because the Vikings screwed up at such an extraordinary level, offense, defense. I guess not as much special teams, but even then, you had Brandon Zylstra, calling for fair catches when he shouldn't have. I think twice at least, and just whatever, right? Like, Dan Bailey didn't miss a kick, great. Matt Weil was the MVP, fantastic. It's not even like he had like a Michael Dixon in the Texas Bowl performance, where like the MVP was just because he was just that stunningly good. He had like one really good punt, which I don't even think was all on him, like, because I think he had some hang time issues on the punt, which, you can be, forgiving of, given that he's backed him in his own end zone that screws up timing anyway. But yeah, he played like really well, like cool.
Well, we really do need to have like a special teams breakdown or something this year to really break down the amazingness of him. I actually was debating reaching out to like Chris Cluey or somebody to seeing if he wanted to come on and talk about how our amazing punter and the wonderful things he'd been doing. Been like, so can you explain exactly why this worked? And also, while you're on, why the hell was he the best player on our team on this particular day?
Exactly.
Is it just a Minnesota thing? Like, whatever. So blame isn't the right word for it, but let's go through the scapegoats that people are angry at. And the first person we want to look at is Kirk Cousins.
Yeah. So, I mean, if you're talking about the season or the game, like that's the question for me.
Let's start with the game and move to the season.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, Cousins, obviously he didn't like play well, right? Like anytime, you score 10 points, and you put, a bunch on the quarterback, it's clear that they didn't play well. That said, you can be kind of, not going to say forgiven, right? You can be kind of, you can kind of adjust your expectations given how much pressure he was under. Again, something like 55% of his dropbacks, which is kind of just this unprecedented level of pressure, unless you're like Deshaun Watson. Just extraordinary amounts of dropbacks where, defenders are bearing down on him. But all that does, it doesn't say he secretly had a good game. It kind of adjusts your bar for what you should expect from him. And so you can do things like take a look at his aggregate statistics and kind of just adjust that for the amount of pressure he was under, or you can just take a look at the snaps where he wasn't under pressure and see how he performed, or say, hey, this is how quarterbacks that are good under pressure perform when pressure arrives. How did he perform when pressure arrived? And the problem is all of the answers to those questions are bad. Like he still played poorly once you adjust for all of those. Like the 17 snaps he had without pressure, he had a 72 quarterback rating. Like, fantastic. Like, he had a better quarterback rating under pressure in this game than he did without pressure, in part because, he threw a touchdown. He had, like, lower yards per attempt and a lower completion rate and all that. But when you have 4.3 yards per attempt when there's no pressure, like, that's a problem that you're creating. Right, because it's not as if Stephon Diggs and Adam Thielen were just locked up, right? It's not as if, Aldrick Robinson, who did make a mistake or two in this game, was never open, right? There were people that were open that, he didn't throw to, or he was not aggressive enough and checked down a little bit too often and stuff like that. And so even in situations where there wasn't pressure, or even when you account for the fact that there was pressure, he played very poorly. He made, big mistakes. And in particular, he was inaccurate, right? Like one could talk about, of course, the tiff that he had with Adam Thielen. How serious is that? I don't know. After the game, obviously they were like, oh, it's just a discussion. I don't know how much I believe that based off of what we saw. But at the same time, there's like a lot of yelling that happens in a football game. And when you're losing, everything seems worse. So it's not as if I think that there's an actual rift between the two. But, you could say there's a miscommunication on that play. Cousins says, I don't have 10 seconds. He's yelling at Adam Thielen. Adam Thielen, one lip reader tells me it's a go route, just throw it. Another lip reader told me it's a corner route, just throw it. Either of those might be the case. Cousins ends up explaining to Thielen how to run routes, which is cool, and talks about kind of the angle that he needs to make on the corner route. So there's a miscommunication or something there, and that that's an issue, right? But he like overthrows Aldrick Robinson by like 15 yards somehow, right? Like he just played poorly even after you just take a look at those snaps where, the pressure wasn't there. And what's crazy, so there's 4 sacks in the game, but honestly, I thought he did like maybe that one of his best assets was his ability to kind of remove the possibility of a sack, which I mean, he was still sacked on 4 of 21 dropbacks under pressure. So it's not as if he was like magical like Russell Wilson or Case Keenum, in terms of avoiding sacks. But like there were plays where he got out of a sack and you're like, oh wow, I didn't expect that from him. And then the ball hits the dirt and you're like, well, I guess it doesn't matter, right? So I mean, he plays poorly. I don't know if he's like responsible for most of the problems in the game. But more and more responsibility was put onto him by the context of the game situation, as it went on, and he kind of didn't rise up to the challenge, or however you want to put it. He didn't do well. He was inaccurate. He made the wrong decisions with the ball. Probably should have been picked off. He couldn't respond well to pressure in the situations where he seemed to respond well to pressure. He couldn't complete passes. He couldn't hit, his receivers in the hands. I guess Stephon Diggs might have dropped one if I remember, but for the most part, I mean, he played really poorly.
So first things first, the best thing that I saw on the internet as far as that argument was concerned was the steamed hams Aurora Borealis thing that Daily Norseman put out.
Oh, what?
Did you see that?
No.
Okay.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, so that was the best thing that could have come from that little argument.
Now I need to watch the Simpsons clip. That's so good.
Yeah, so that was the best thing that could have come out of that whole thing. And if I could make a plea to all announced teams moving forward, if we can stop saying this is why Kirk Cousins was brought in here for every game.
Right. He was brought to win these games.
No,
I mean, like in the sense that any quarterback is hired to do that. I mean, I guess
we could. I suppose we could bring Blake Bortles in to win these games too. It doesn't mean he's going to do it, but what we need to do is stop saying that phrase, because regardless, it's not happening, and especially if a winning team is involved, it's not happening. Apparently, we will get into that later in the game or later in the review. But boy, Cousins was everywhere. And it's one thing to say that he was going to be pressured. We all knew he was going to be pressured. We've watched the Chicago defense all year. What we didn't expect was to see a shell-shocked quarterback try to figure out what to do. And I don't know if this was Stefanski just losing his mind as well, but even the scripted stuff did not look good.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think it was kind of weird, right? Because in his first game against Miami, the scripted stuff looked great. And then there was some kind of stalling partway through, and you're like, well, maybe he has some trouble kind of adjusting to defenses. And then you go into the second game, and the scripted stuff against the Lions looks awful. 4 drives with no results. And then they just kind of pick up steam and roll over the Lions. And then in this game, kind of the same thing, right? And so I'm kind of curious, what is the character of a Stefanski offense from the perspective of game planning, right? Because we're getting kind of wildly different looks from what he can do. And in this game, yeah, the scripted stuff looked really bad. I mean, of course, the Vikings came out flat. I mean, that's just true, but they stayed flat. And so what's different about the scripted stuff? I think here it just wasn't I'm not going to say it wasn't unpredictable enough. I mean, they come out throwing 3 passes to start. And, Mike Zimmer says, well, the script called for 2 passes to start. The third one, they were in third down, right? And so you just got to throw the ball, which fair enough. But I guess that's unpredictable from the perspective of like the things the Vikings have talked about over the past couple of weeks. But it's not enough to like pass, right? Just like when you say go for it on fourth down, it's not enough to just like, oh, the numbers tell me to go for it on fourth down, I should go for it on fourth down. You need to like design a good play, right? Like on fourth down or when you're throwing the ball. And it just felt like there's a lot less thought in how to approach the particularities of the Bears defense in terms of designing their plays than there should have been, right? Because, against Miami, I mean, they picked on kind of the same concept over and over again. They were like, well, the sail route, that's working well for us against Miami. And we know that that's a cover 3 beater. Miami sometimes does that because they've kind of got this pedigree that is kind of related to Zimmer's pedigree. Fine. Okay, great. now you've got a team that, I mean, Zimmer did a really good job kind of describing what the defense does. I mean, they'll go into cover 6. He mentions that they'll go cover 2 one side, quarters the other side. That's often called cover 6. They'll do cover 2, cover 3, cover 1. They'll do a lot of similar stuff in the back end that's more varied even than what the Vikings do in the back end. The Vikings are very kind of variable, if you will, on what they do defensively. And this is kind of even a more exotic defense. And so you can't really have the same simple game plan with kind of static route concepts that you normally would. But you need to know kind of early in games, are the Bears going to be in cover 4 more often? Are they going to have a situation where we can kind of tell that there's different coverages on different sides of the ball? If that happens, is there a matchup we can exploit? And I thought it was kind of weird that the Vikings didn't go after, especially in the scripted portion, didn't go after, Deion Bush or the replacement nickel corner, who has been playing pretty well. Bryce Callahan goes on IR. They have to bring someone in. But he's been playing pretty well, but he's not a match for Adam Thielen. And they don't really design their offense to attack that matchup all that much, right? And especially you'd expect in the scripted portion for that to be the case, right? Where, if you've got man coverage, which they had kind of early in the game for some points, that you'd go after that matchup. And if you have zone coverage, you try to exploit kind of the differences that spacing creates. And it just didn't seem like they came in with much of a plan to approach the fact that the Bears are just a different kind of defense than the Dolphins or the Lions.
Yeah, it was from a strategic standpoint, it really didn't seem like anyone on the sidelines knew what they were doing as far as the offense was concerned. And although I do have a question, and this is a question that has been brought up a few times on Twitter, and just wanted to clarify it here, the call that was a hand inside the face mask that affected Thielen, should that have been pass interference, or was that the correct call?
No, I think that's mostly correctly called. Like, I think the difference is, so it's not pass interference, I think, because I don't think it was catchable, and maybe Thielen might have gotten his hand on it or something like that. I remember watching it at the time and saying, oh, that's probably not pass interference, but that's definitely like a penalty, right? You just can't do that. The question is, is it face masking, which tends to occur on plays where the player has the ball in his hands. Otherwise, it's like illegal hands to the face. That's very often what happens to the offensive or defensive lineman. Or is it unnecessary roughness? And I think it should have been unnecessary roughness. And the difference here is, because I think they're both 15 yards and an automatic first down. The difference here is that it increases the likelihood that a player might get ejected, for a particular infraction in the game. And I think that is if we're in a league where on some unnecessary roughness calls, or I guess taunting, whatever, can essentially give you a yellow card, put you on a short list to get ejected, that is a play that should. So that's a difference in the call. But no, I don't think it's like pass interference. They shouldn't have been moved further down the field. I think it's a face mask or an unnecessary roughness, because it's not catchable. The ball had already gone pretty far past Thielen, I think. And yeah, I mean, that's a play where I think you call unnecessary roughness, or I guess face mask.
Well, PI calls are given on passes that are completely uncatchable all the time.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. But that's a problem with those calls. Not, I mean, I guess maybe be consistent about it. But I think if you're going to be consistent about it, do it for uncatchable passes.
I'd say we have to figure out what a catch is, but I feel like we could have a 2-hour show on that, and it would be just as inconclusive. So the next thing I guess we could talk about is Mike Zimmer and his inability to win a big game. Is that the way that we put this?
It's a thing. I don't think it's a real thing in terms of like a persistent quality that he lacks as a coach, right? Because this year, of course, I mean, the Vikings, they have a number of big games. They don't win any of them. I guess you could say that, at the time they played Green Bay, it was a big game, and they tie that one. And then the second time they play Green Bay, it's an important game, but it's not a big game because Green Bay is not good. But, it's like a primetime game. But yeah, they don't have a win against, except I guess now the Eagles. They didn't have a win against a team with a winning record. Retrospectively, I guess they have a win against a team with a winning record because of the Eagles, which I don't know. I mean, it's kind of like the same thing with the college football rankings, right? We talked about this before, where do you count it at the time or do you count it after the fact when they get those wins? But yeah, they didn't win in big games this year. They had a must-win game against the Bears, and they didn't show up, right? And, you know, I guess they had 2 must-win games against the Dolphins and the Lions, and they showed up to those. But, you know, big games kind of imply bigger swings in win probability, and the Dolphins game did not have a big swing in playoff probability. And also, like, good teams, and neither of those teams are good. And so against good teams, they fell flat. You could say they fell flat against the Rams, the Saints, whatever. I thought they actually did a good job kind of getting back into the game against the Saints until kind of a 9-minute drive, despite, you know, 2 turnovers that led directly to scores. But last year, the Vikings did really well in big games. Like, notably, of course, they didn't do well in one big game, but you know, they fought back to rally against the Saints for their second win of the year against the Saints. They crushed the Rams. They did a really good job against the Rams. They beat teams with winning records in big moments during the season last year. You don't get home field advantage and win a playoff game if you can't win big games. So obviously, you know, Mike Zimmer and, you know, the team, most of the team was there. The team knows that they can win in big games against winning teams. It's not like he persistently doesn't show up against winning teams. It's not like, you know, this weird Cincinnati Bengals Marvin Lewis thing where, you know, good team shows up, and if they're in division, maybe they have a chance, but if they're out of division, you know, who knows, and they can't win a playoff game. They won a playoff game. They've played big games. They've won big games. They've beaten good teams, you know, both in 2017 and in 2016. And so, like, I think they're 6-6 in primetime games since 2016, and that includes their abysmal record in primetime games from 2018, right? Like, where they have like 1 win and like 3 losses or something like that this year. But, you know, that's counterbalanced by the fact that in 2016, 2017, they did really, really well in primetime games. So, yeah, I mean, I don't think it's a thing for the Vikings, and specifically Mike Zimmer. I think you could say that's a thing that occurred this year. I don't think it's a thing that is a persistent worry that bothers me.
I suppose the next person we could put down on the list of scapegoats here is Spielman is getting a little bit of flack for the I guess plans this year involving drafting and ignoring the gaping holes in the offensive line.
Yeah, I'm a little bit torn on this one too, because if you take a look at how the Vikings have invested in the offensive line, and I detailed this in my piece at The Athletic about who to blame for the season, the first discussion I have is the offensive line. You know, what went wrong there? And there's a couple of things. I think the first thing is they have 2 high-priced free agents. You know, Riley Reif, who I think ranks 5th among all tackles this year, and all left tackles in cap hit. So they paid a lot for that guy. They paid a lot, relatively speaking, for Mike Remmers, who he was signed as a tackle. Now that he's a guard, he's like the 11th highest paid guard in the NFL, especially among right guards, I think. You know, they invested a 3rd round pick in a center. On average, starting centers in the NFL are picked in the 4th round or later. So there's a couple of notable first-round centers, but for the most part, they get picked in the 3rd and 4th round. They picked a 2nd-round right tackle. That's higher than average for a right tackle. You know, the only area where they didn't invest, you know, more than league average at the position in either draft picks or cap hit was at the left guard position, and they had, you know, an injury there. You know, they had what they thought was kind of a solution in Nick Easton, who, you know, I'm not a huge fan of, relatively speaking. They put Tom Compton there, and that actually worked out before Tom Compton's injury. He actually was doing a really good job, you know, despite kind of, you know, my expectations, a lot of people's expectations of him throughout the year. He had 1 bad game against Aaron Donald where he gave up 7 pressures, and then he gave up 8 pressures in the 6 other games, which is really good for a guard and particularly good for someone who's getting paid as much as he was. And then kind of he gets injured, and then after the injury, he gives up a ton of pressure. So that's a problem too. The Vikings were kind of aggressive about getting offensive linemen from some points of view, right? Because they got a 2nd-round offensive lineman. Maybe they didn't get one in the 1st, but they got one in the 2nd round at a position that doesn't get as much investment in the draft as the Vikings gave it. They traded for a center /guard They signed another guard in free agency who ended up starting. So I'm not going to ever say that they underinvest in the offensive line. And then you could say, well, it's not about whether or not they underinvest in the offensive line. It's about misevaluating, right? Because Riley Reiff isn't playing like a top 5 tackle. He's getting paid like one, but he's not playing like one. Mike Remmers, maybe he's a decent, right tackle, but they didn't have a solution at guard. They drafted a right tackle. They moved their right tackle to right guard. He's a bad right guard. Fine. I get all that. That makes sense to me. But at the same time, you have to take into account the coaching situation that they're in, right? With, Tony Sparano dying, they're in a really difficult spot, both kind of emotionally and then also kind of logistically on the field in terms of like the technical aspects of coaching. Riley Reiff and Pat Elflein, the two players who played the same position last year for the Vikings, both had significantly better years last year, at least in pass protection, and I think as run blockers, although I think their PFF grade is a little bit different, but definitely significantly better as pass protectors last year than this year. And I think a lot of that can be attributable to coaching. And that even accounts for the fact that Case Keenum does a really good job escaping sacks and stuff like that, because if you just look at pressure rate, not sack rate, but just pressure rate, they had significantly better years last year than they did this year. And Elflein had not a great year in pass protection last year. He just had this absurdly, he was like the worst center by far in pass protection this year. And I think a lot of that might have to do with the coaching situation. Some of that might have to do with the fact that he's returning from injury. Maybe he wasn't, fully healed, or maybe he wasn't kind of playing within his body or whatever for the whole season. And that might have played a role too. But the Vikings once again have more injuries than usual along their offensive line. And I was like, oh, the amount of injuries they had this year, that's actually probably normal. And so I looked it up and I looked at the injuries across the league, and the Vikings ranked 5th for having, the most number of offensive linemen play over 100 snaps this year. And that doesn't even account for the fact that Nick Easton and Avion Collins didn't play a snap at all. And they were, your starting guard and your 6th offensive lineman. And so they go right to number 7 and Tom Compton. They go right to number 8 and Danny Isidora. They go right to number 9 and Brett Jones. And so, let's not forget that Rashad Hill played too, right? And so, which that's not injury related, although Brian O'Neill ends up playing because Rashad Hill plays. And that's just kind of one of the few examples where an injury opens up an opportunity for the better. But for the most part, they'd still got injured more often than usual. It just didn't feel like they got injured more often than usual because of the persistently poor injury luck that the Vikings have had on the offensive line going back to 2014, where they've had the most injured offensive line unit in the league. And so this is just kind of an example where it's just injured more often than average. So all of these things play a role in why the offensive line played poorly, right? And you could say the general manager needs to do a better job, and he does. There's no question, right? Because I think if your plan is Nick Easton, that's a bad plan. Again, I think that Nick Easton's more of a liability than a lot of the people who work for the Vikings. So there's a disagreement there, but I think that I'm not going to really knock a general manager too much for not being able to generate depth on the offensive line, because that's just so hard to do across the league that very, very few teams can do it, and that's a really high standard. But I don't think they did as much to generate, starting players on the offensive line in the interior. And so that's not to say, all of this argument about the context of coaching and injuries is not to say that Spielman doesn't take some blame for what's been happening on the offensive line, or a ton of blame on the offensive line. But I think saying it's Spielman's fault that the offensive line is playing as poorly as it does is correct in a lot of respects, but is missing a lot of nuance. And I think it's a really poor argument for saying, maybe Spielman should go, because the reason that the offensive line is so disappointing, obviously they're playing poorly, but the reason they're so disappointing is because they're cutting off the talent of a team, or cutting off the performance of a team at the knees that is so immensely talented that they put Pro Bowlers, even in losing seasons, at every position, right? They've got Pro Bowlers at every level of the defense. And again, that's a problem where I think the Pro Bowl has kind of a weird process. Harrison Smith has a down year, Anthony Barr has a down year, but they got there because of the reputation that was generated by them being genuinely good players, right? They've got Pro Bowlers at every level of the defense. They've got, 2 Pro Bowl quality receivers, all pro quality receivers. They've got a pretty good tight end. They've got a really, kind of high level running back. They've got, a marquee quarterback for as good or as bad as he can be in particular situations. They've got an extraordinarily talented team. So the reason that the offensive line is frustrating is because of how talented this team is. If it's Arizona, right? Where the whole team is just lacks talent, right? The offensive line is a problem, but that's it. It's a problem among many problems to be solved. Offensive coordinator, wide receiver, along the defense, they've got a lot of things that they need to do. Tight end, right? For the Vikings, it's like the offensive line is the reason that the team is being held back. The only way the team can be held back is if the rest of the team is talented. The only way that team can be talented is if the general manager is doing a good job acquiring that talent. And so to say Spielman is at fault for why the season is disappointing, it can only be true if Spielman is responsible for why the season was set up to be successful in the first place. And so I would say that keeping Spielman on staff makes a ton of sense, because if your weakness is at one position as a general manager, you're doing a really good job as a general manager. And maybe it's in two spots because of this quarterback thing, but he did a great job with Keenum and Bradford. Obviously the Bradford stuff, higher risk, but you have to do it. And I'm not going to say he did necessarily an awful job with Cousins. Obviously, he overpaid him. That's just kind of how it is when you attract a quarterback in free agency. But say he's got a weakness at quarterback and offensive line. It's not necessarily a problem that can be solved externally, but when you bring in an offensive line coach, which the Vikings should probably do or will probably do this season, you'll get another perspective on both coaching offensive linemen, which plays a big role in their performance this year, and evaluating and scouting offensive linemen. So that's fixable, right? He doesn't persistently make bad decisions in the draft. They genuinely do a really good job finding a lot of good players late in the draft, in the middle of the draft, and at the top of the draft. He's a really high performer in terms of draft picks. But yeah, he's got this problem with the offensive line that's not even entirely his fault. So those are my thoughts on that. I think Spielman's a really good general manager who's got, these one or two weaknesses, and every general manager has weaknesses. So getting rid of a general manager that's otherwise really good, terrible idea.
And it's not like we can just grab one from the NFL network like the Raiders just did.
Right, yeah. I mean, I suppose you could grab Louis Riddick, right? But Mike Mayock is gone. So.
At this point, can we just grab Rich Eisen for like a position in some way? Like, I feel like that's the natural.
That'll be fun, at least. You might end up with a lot of punters on the team, but it'd be fun.
Well, he does respect the punter. It is true. He believes that punters are people too. Where else can we go with the game? Can we talk about the defense? Can we talk about our defensive coordinator who the news today broke that he will be interviewed for a potential head coach position elsewhere? Let's talk about the defense a little bit and how Mitch Trubisky beat them.
But did he, though?
Well, you could argue the question of whether or not QB wins count as a stat again, or you can look at the way that the run game decimated the Vikings, or you can look at how receivers who are still fairly unheard of are managed to tear the secondary into shreds.
So, I mean, the Javon Wims and Kevin White having good days is very frustrating, right? And I even made fun of the fact that on the other side of the ball that, Bilal Nichols was one of the people that sacked Kirk Cousins, and a bunch of Bears fans are like, he doesn't know. And I'm like, what are you talking about, man? I wanted the Vikings to draft Bilal Nichols. Like, I know who he is, but he's also like sixth in your defensive line rotation behind Roy Robertson Harris. He's a fifth round pick from a small school. It's embarrassing. He has
the reason
two other
you know
sacks
him.
This season.
Yeah, the reason you know him is because you do draft stuff. That's the only reason why anybody knows anyone that deep on the depth chart for the Bears.
Right. Like, it is. He has two other sacks this season, and his pressure rate is 77th at his position, right? Like, he flashes, right? He's not like secretly like when Brandon Graham was a backup defensive end for the Eagles, or Everson Griffin behind, Brian Robinson and Jared Allen. No, man, he's just like a really good, two gapping defensive end in a Vic Fangio scheme. Like, great. As a backup. But yeah, it's like the same thing. Like Javon Wims was this kind of this training camp superstar, kind of this bottom of the roster. People are kind of waiting for him to break into the regular season lineup in the active rotation, kind of like they have been for Vikings receivers for some time. I don't think he's going to turn to like Adam Thielen, right? So like I understand that Back when Adam Thielen was making plays in like 2014 and mostly 2015, other teams would be, frustrated that like, oh, who the hell is Adam Thielen, right? Why is he doing stuff? Or watching like, teams play the Bucs and seeing Adam Humphries, do stuff like Javon Wims, like great. He's probably better than like, your typical fifth receiver, but yeah, I mean, he doing well against the Vikings secondary, that's just like a different thing, and that's very frustrating. As for Trubisky, I mean, I got a couple of tweets from Bears fans, as I expect to, because I've been, bashing Trubisky all season, both in jest with the throw left stuff, although, how much in jest given the data, and also like seriously, I don't think he's a particularly good quarterback. And they're like, oh man, you think he's not a good quarterback? Yeah, well, look, he did better than Kirk Cousins, and I was like, well, yeah, they're both bad today. That's great. They can both be bad. Trubisky throws for 6.26 yards per attempt as a passer rating of like 85.9, 86, something like that. He didn't have a good day. He performed on third down, of course, benefits from a number of penalties, both genuinely good calls and whatever calls. Picks on Holton Hill. Doesn't actually do all that well picking on Holton Hill aside from the penalties. But, he has a roughish day, but Jordan Howard, tears through the defense, 109 yards. He gets 2 touchdowns, and Trubisky was like there for the win, and he didn't screw it up, right? Which he's already better than Ponder, so that's good. But yeah, I mean, he performs about as well as you'd expect a young quarterback who hasn't established himself to perform against a high-level defense. The problem is that high-level defense didn't show up in other parts of the field, like defending the run, right, or preventing penalties from occurring and stuff like that. So yeah, I think they converted a high degree of those third downs. A lot of those third downs are converted by penalty. Obviously, he jukes out Anthony Barr. And that's, both a credit to him and fault on Anthony Barr. But yeah, I mean, the defense in the context of defending the pass, the defense on the aggregate actually did pretty well once you get rid of the penalties. But the penalties are such a big part of why the Bears were able to kind of march down the field that it ends up creating like these really good third down numbers, even though the only reason they were in third down so often is because they were failing so often on first or second down when Trubisky was throwing. So, yeah, I mean, Trubisky looks fine once you look at the other quarterback in the game. He's throwing for like 3.8 yards per attempt or something like that. But that's not your like baseline for a good performance, generally speaking. Like you need to throw above 7 yards an attempt for you to say you had a good game. And someone you tell me he had a great game. Like, no, he didn't. Like he was there, right? He didn't have an abysmal game. That's good for him against a good defense. That's pretty good. But I don't think he beat the Vikings on offense. I think penalties did. I think Jordan Howard did a really great job. Couple of big runs from him. And there are moments where he performed on third down, but like, yeah. Hey, it's not really about Trubisky, right? Because the Vikings have like 14 other games next year that they have to care about. But I just want to get that off my chest.
Still believing in the take that he's a better version of Christian Ponder?
Well, I mean, he's not screwing up, so he's a much better version of Christian Ponder, right? Last couple of games, he only threw short. This game, he had a nice deep ball, but to the left, of course. But for the most part, also threw short, which cool.
So was effective, and that's all that you can really ask for, I suppose.
Yeah, they didn't ask him to do too much, so.
And that's the thing, is that their defense is so swallowing right now. They just eats everything up that they don't need Trubisky to do much. They just need him to not screw up. And that can be a winning formula at times.
Right. I mean, I think, was it without the 40-yard pass, which, I mean, obviously that happened, he has like 7.2 yards per catch. Not attempt, per catch. It was an insanely short passing game from him with one deep ball. Like, they didn't ask him to do too much. They asked him to not screw up. He didn't screw up. With a defense like that, that's a pretty good formula, especially against a team as lackluster as the Vikings were in that game. I don't think that's going to work, in the playoffs, but, I don't know. Who am I going to cheer for in the friggin' Bears-Eagles game? I don't know, man. That sucks.
A Comet. Like an asteroid?
Cheer for the meteor, yeah.
Well, I mean, we can go into that real quick. I mean, I do have the playoff sheet in front of me at the moment. Do you know who you're picking for the AFC playoff or the AFC championship game and the NFC championship game at least?
Well, I know that I'm cheering for the Chargers to win it all, which that's a mistake, but I can't help it. I'm a Vikings fan.
I think they beat the Ravens and then lose out.
I mean, that would make sense. But I don't know. It's not that Phillip Rivers is a good guy and so he deserves one, but he's a good quarterback and so he deserves one, right? Plus, if he wins the whole thing, that means that the people I hate aren't going to win it, right? The Eagles aren't going to win. Brady's not going to win. Breeze isn't going to win. That's all fantastic stuff. So the Chargers winning is just good in general. But I guess on the AFC side, on the NFC side, I mean, the Rams have been lackluster. The Eagles don't have a quarterback. The Bears don't have a quarterback. I guess the Saints are.
Who is the better quarterback, Nick Foles or Mitch Trubisky?
I know. I was thinking about this. I was like, who's better? And oof. God, I really don't think much of Trubisky.
If Trubisky gets a ring this year, I think a lot of us need to take a step back after making fun of Chicago so badly during that draft. It was still an incredibly stupid decision. Incredibly stupid.
I mean, the Chicago could have drafted any number of the other quarterbacks that would have been better, right? Like, you would have been in a better spot. But I guess the rest of the draft strategy worked out pretty well for them. Not that Roquan Smith has been critical to their hopes and dreams this season either. So, I guess Foles, and that's good for my brand too, right?
Because it helps solidify the whole Carson Wentz thing. You're just dying for Nick Foles to win another Super Bowl and then Carson Wentz to get traded out to Oakland for more picks. Gruden,
yeah, right. Mayock and Gruden love him.
Mm-hmm. It's the only way, quite frankly, that this story ends well for anybody. He just dies in obscurity in Oakland.
Jesus. Plus, I mean, I'd like to see.
That got dark. Sorry.
It did. I'd like to see what Oakland would do to a North Dakota boy like Carson Wentz. Philly's a town that maybe it can turn you a little bit dark, but they're behind him, right? Mm-hmm. Oakland. It doesn't matter if they like you, man. Well, it could turn you.
Oakland to Vegas. He ends up being the Vegas quarterback.
Oh, yeah. Oh, that's great. Carson Wentz figuring out what hookers and blow are. Oh, fantastic.
And the fact that flights from Fargo, North Dakota to Vegas are ridiculously cheap. It's under $75. There's a lot of Bison fans that are going to be filling up that hole in the ground stadium. Ooh. Have they started building that? I actually don't. Yeah, there's your future plan. There's your way to make Oakland. There's your way to make Fargo, Vegas East. I don't know, Raiders fan East. It'll be weird, but it's.
Outside of the Strip, how different is Vegas? Is it just a hot Fargo outside of the Strip?
It is as hot as it is in Fargo. It is as cold in Fargo. Yeah. In Vegas, it is cold in Fargo. Yeah. Okay. I could see that. They have an in and out. That's important to some people. So you don't have the Seahawks beating the Cowboys yet? I'm surprised you haven't talked about your other team.
The Chiefs? No, they're the AFC, man.
Oh, okay. I'm sorry.
That would be pretty fun too, honestly. Andy Reid deserves a ring.
No, he does not. You liar.
I love my new favorite team, the Chiefs.
That is a terrible lie. I will not have you sit here and sully the Norse Code podcast by you telling. Are you a particularly large fan of Andy Reid's play calling in 2-minute drills or his ability to time manage? Is that what you're is that a thing that you absolutely love?
Some people call character flaws weaknesses. I think imperfections are what make people relatable, James. This is just good character writing by Andy Reid.
So what you're saying is that your 2019 resolution is the exact same as your 2018 resolution to get into more Twitter fights.
Whoa, that's not even a character flaw. That's endearing, the number of fights I get into. At least that's what I
tell yourself at night when you're trying to sleep but your phone keeps lighting up.
No, but Seahawks Cowboys. Dak played pretty well the last couple of weeks, but I mean it's the Seahawks.
Yeah, I think Seahawks take that one.
Yeah.
I think
Russell Wilson's an incredible quarterback.
Yeah.
The fact that you've got fourth quarters means that they're always in it because he's like this insane fourth quarter guy. I mean, the Dallas defense is like way underrated and stuff like that. Like Byron Jones is playing really well. They have a pass rush. Their linebacker core is just studly, right? But I don't know. I think the Seahawks just have a higher quality team. And better coaching. There's no question about that.
Yeah. I think the Saints end up going to the Super Bowl. It's either the Saints or the Bears, and I think the Saints end up going in, which, boy, that'll be a fun watch. I wonder what else will be on that day.
Right. Well, so I think the most likely scenarios are the Saints and the Bears. So who's the most likely outside of that, right? Because you've got the Eagles, the Seahawks, the Cowboys, and the Rams. And the Rams have been just struggling recently, but they seem maybe the most likely. I think actually out of all of those, given that I don't think Nick Foles is actually good, it's probably the Seahawks, right? Like they're the third most likely if this Rams decline is real.
If the Rams decline is real, if Gurley remains kind of on edge, like on that borderline of hurt, that is huge for the Rams. Cowboys, I still think are trash. I can't shake it after watching after watching more Cowboys games this year than I care to admit. That team, Amari Cooper is a very important addition for them, but still, like that's rough. Eagles. Well, I mean, is Foles going to play? I hate that ends up being the whole the deal breaker on that, but Foles very likely could get eaten by that Bears defense, and that Bears defense is not a forgiving one at all. So Bears defense is gonna just take him out. Boy,
yeah, I think that's the case. I'll go Seahawks as the dark horse in the NFC, and then the AFC. The favorites are the Chiefs, right? And so. And people are gonna say like the Patriots always have really good odds once they make it. This is just such a weak Patriots team that
this feels like NFC Championship lost Patriots team.
Right? Yeah. Where they could be taken up by the Chiefs or the Chargers. Who else is there in the AFC?
So we have the Colts and the Texans.
The Colts, those are both interesting teams. Andrew Luck is still on his like comeback ways where he has the ability to generate comebacks, but it's like this weird Andrew Luck that throws much shorter passes than he ever has in his career. If you mention the words arm strength, Colts Twitter comes at you. And in fairness, it seems like it's improved over the course of the season as he's gotten better. But I don't know. He can be pretty fun. I mean, he still throws like picks that are weird. But I think the Texans are just a more fun team to watch in general. And that may be because of how bad their offensive line is. Like maybe that just contributes to how fun they are to watch. But I guess I'll be pulling for the Texans. I guess I think the Colts are probably a better team.
I can't believe the Ravens are in here. Like it's Ravens versus the Chargers.
It's Lamar Jackson season, man. So I'll take the Chargers. I'll take the Colts. I'll take the buys. Right, those are my options. Then that sets up some pretty interesting matchups. But it's difficult to imagine the Chiefs not winning against whoever they have. Hopefully, it's not the Chargers. Is it? In that case, because they reseed after
they reseed, so the lowest remaining seed would play the Chiefs. So it would be 5-4. So if the Texans won, Texans would go to Foxborough, and that would leave the winner of the Chargers and Ravens to play Kansas City.
All right, so if the Colts win, that makes the Colts play Kansas City, right?
Yes.
Okay, so hopefully the Colts win. Even though I like the Texans more. That way the Chargers can play the Patriots, take out the Patriots, then you get the Chargers-Chiefs, and I'd much prefer that in the AFC Championship game than like Patriots-Chiefs or whatever.
Boy, I'm just trying to envision how Phillip Rivers, who has managed to not completely screw up a fourth quarter this year, like I just like the way that he typically does in the way of like losing with 2 minutes left and throwing some undeniably terrible pick. It used to be automatic. This year he's flipped the script and has not been terrible at all for it.
I mean, he's just had so much experience in
this is what he
2 minute
does.
drills. Yeah.
But I'm just trying to envision him making it to the Super Bowl, and it's hard because I've seen so many of those.
I love it, and he's going to take all 18 of his kids. They're going to fill up the entire...
The 19th on the way, probably.
Right, yeah. They're going to fill up the entire lower rung of the Mercedes-Benz Dome in Atlanta. Mm-hmm. It's just all going to be Phillip Rivers' family. Just like it's kind of like a moat concept. Like if the fans get angry, he can rely on like members of his family to form a buffer.
Oh, yeah.
It's really smart, honestly. I'm very excited for Phillip Rivers to like yell at some third string tight end about, running the wrong route in the Super Bowl. I'm very excited about this.
Yeah, so Seahawks versus Chargers then. Yeah, let's do it. Seahawks versus Chargers.
Oh, man, yeah. In that case, I'm 100% a Chargers fan. Here are my teams in the playoffs. 1, Chargers. 2, Chiefs. It's very easy to be an AFC fan, I guess. 3... Oh, no, I have to say it, don't I?
Say it.
3, Seahawks. Right?
You feel better?
Because it's not Dallas, it's not the Eagles, it's not the Rams, it's not the Saints, it's not the Ravens. Although with Lamar Jackson, it's much easier to cheer for the Ravens. So
it is.
Lamar Jackson, Ravens 3, Joe Flacco, Ravens like 7. But yeah, so Lamar Jackson, Ravens 3, and then Seahawks 4, and then who cares after that? If you've got 4 teams, I mean, who cares?
There you go. Okay. Let's go to the mailbag. First question. Mike Ellis asks, who has a better season next year? Vikings or Browns?
Oh, wow. That's a really good question, actually.
It is. And last year that would be a total slap in the face, or year before that, or I can keep going. But this year it's actually like it's fairly apt.
I think Browns fans will be happier. As for who's more likely to make a playoff run, God, you know what? No, screw it. I think it's the Vikings. It's so easy to be down on the team after a season like this, but it's just such an immensely talented team that I don't think actually has the coaching problems that people think it does, especially after they've got, Stefanski as our offensive coordinator. They might bring in a new offensive line coach. The Browns, obviously, Freddie Kitchens is doing a really incredible job with Baker Mayfield. At one point, they were like 4th in points per drive. So they've got a great offense. They've got, a lot of good pieces on defense. But I don't think they're quite there yet in terms of their receiving talent. And I like Antonio Callaway. I have him in a couple of dynasty leagues, so it's not as if I don't think that, he can be really talented. But I don't think overall they've got the receiving talent. I think at the back end, they had a really bad year from one of their best corners, Brian Body Calhoun. Go Gophers. That I don't know if you can count on that secondary. Jabril Peppers, what's he doing when he's like 40 yards off screen? They've got, a pretty decent pass rush and stuff like that. But I just don't think there are enough pieces of that team to consistently compete once you get to the playoffs. But A, I'm cheering for the Browns because I'm not a monster. But B, and also because Baker Mayfield is dope as hell. But B, I think that Browns fans are going to be pretty happy with whatever ends up happening with this team because they've been denied so many wins for so long that even like missing the playoffs and going 8-8 or even 9-7 and missing the playoffs, I think would make them happy. Not necessarily that they would call the season a success, but it would be good to see. For Vikings fans, 9-7 is another disappointing season, right? So I do think the Vikings will make the playoffs. I think that they might be a 10-win team. I'm making this prediction before I knew what the coaching situation is, what they're doing in free agency in the offseason, stuff like that in the draft. But I do think that the Vikings will have a better season by kind of objective metrics. But I think that the Browns fans will be happier.
Well, let's look at the let's look at the division that the Browns will be playing in. So the Browns will be playing in a division with the Bengals, who just fired their coach.
Yeah, they're about to go 1-15 or 0-16, right? Because Marvin Lewis was the one recommended by Hugh Jackson was the one recommended by Marvin Lewis. So that's a great rivalry, Hugh Jackson versus the Browns, a rivalry that started 3 years ago.
Exactly. And then you look at the Ravens, who are becoming a very interesting team behind their new quarterback, and then you have a Steelers team that is valuing.
They're difficult to interpret.
Yeah, I think that's fair. They're valuing Ben Roethlisberger, who probably could have retired 2 years ago, and no one would have.
was openly thinking about it 2 years ago. I don't know if I still have it. All right, we'll draft Mason Rudolph. Are you kidding me? Screw you guys.
Yep, a Steelers team which likely will not have either Le'Veon Bell or Antonio Brown next year. Right. Who is demanding a trade and who will likely get something after his benching of for week 17.
Well, I will say this. So it just came out that the demanding a trade stuff might be an exaggeration by whoever initially reported it. It might have just been he was venting his frustration after being benched and saying, why don't they trade me, instead of formally requesting a trade. So I will say that, but that doesn't mean that there aren't serious locker room issues there. So that's worth pointing out.
Yeah. And there's been enough history in that city with Ben Roethlisberger and his contemporaries, shall we say, at running back, at wide receiver, even, offensive coordinators, where there starts to be a question as to, like, if you wake up or like if you see like one angry person, or like if you like meet one like miserable person, maybe that's kind of on them. But if every person you meet is miserable, it might be on you.
Right. Yeah, exactly.
There might be
Ben Roethlisberger might just be a winning Jay Cutler.
With like a Nicorette like patch or whatever.
Right, yeah.
He's taking the Chantix and he's making calls in the night that he doesn't remember. And just like upsetting Juju Schuster, like 3 a.m. Hey, question about your mother. Like, wait, what? It's like 3 a.m. Ben, why are you calling me? Like this is what's going on. It's a mixture of Ambien, because apparently Ambien, when you take it late at night, can cause racism too. But
yeah,
it's the combination of Ambien and Chantix, and maybe it is all Ben Roethlisberger.
It's the worst of all Ray Liotta worlds.
You mix like a Ray Liotta with Roseanne situation. It's tragic, and that's the face of your organization. So just throwing. And you can't just kill them off like Roseanne did, or like ABC did for the show. I feel like we're going off topic. Joe Rigel asks, should we be preparing ourselves for the Vikings to not make it past the wild card round next season, which would lead Zimmer and Spielman being fired because Cousins is mediocre, which would lead the team to a complete team rebuild where we don't sniff the playoffs for years after? I feel like this might be an exaggeration of sorts.
Well, it's you convince yourself, and then you figure out what the next step is. Convince yourself that that's likely, and then the next step, and so on. So like
butterfly flaps its wings.
Yeah, and it could even be like, what's the most likely scenario given this? Okay, what's the most likely scenario given that? What's the most likely scenario given that? And you stack up all of the most likely scenarios, and you're like, oh, well, this is probably going to happen then. And that's not really how reality works, right? Like there's a 60% chance of that, which leads to a 60% chance of that, which leads to a 60% chance of that. Now you're at like a 20 or 19% chance of all three things happening, but you've convinced yourself it's going to happen, right? It could be one of those, right? But I do think I'm not going to say Vikings fans should prepare themselves for disappointment because that's like very redundant. Like they are already there. But I will say I do think that the team will be better than last year. Whether or not that's going to result in a playoff win, I think probably. And so then Zimmer won't get fired and stuff like that. So I would not prepare for a team rebuild in the sense that I would just kind of give up everything with regards to following the team. But I will say, like, don't stash the idea away. Like, keep it in the back of your mind.
Like it's already going to be anyway. Beef Brewski asks, I've got 2 questions. First, aren't the Seahawks and Bears proof that run-first offense is alive and well? And second, can we see the offense improve without compromising our defense?
I mean, if you take a look at the most impactful plays that both of those teams have had, it's been involving the pass, either because the Bears are just incredible at defending the pass and have been generating more turnovers than anyone else in the league, a lot of them coming on interceptions, or the Seattle Seahawks have been doing a really good job throwing the ball. I mean, Russell Wilson and Tyler Lockett's 158.3 passer rating, right? They run a lot, but that only results in winning, right? Because they're not like running like better than everyone else. They're running more than a lot of teams, but it only results in winning because in some aspect of the game, either offense or defense, they're doing an incredible job with regards to passing. And so I don't think it proves that a run game can drive success, but it does like indicate that like an emphasis on the run isn't going to kill you, right? Like, I think that the Seahawks are hurting themselves by running as often as they do. But you know, whatever, right? Like it's working. So I think it proves or provides evidence that, you know, if you're a run heavy offense, you can win, but I don't think it's because you're a run heavy offense. I think it's almost in spite of it. Which is fine. I mean, like teams win in spite of problems all the time, right? Like you can't say, you know, the 2007 Giants were a perfect team, right? They won in spite of a lot of things. Their Super Bowl MVP quarterback being one of them, right? So, yeah, I think this is a case where they're winning kind of in spite of because they've got such these great qualities against the pass. And again, I don't think that running the ball is, you know, as bad as a lot of the detractors say. I think that it's worth about a third as much as passing. So if you're good at running, you're still improving your win probability. But you know, that's a question about running the ball versus, you know, how important running backs are and how much of an impact running backs have on running the ball. That's a different kind of question. But I do think that running the ball well does have a relationship to winning. It's just weaker than passing. And so it can help you if you're good at it.
Next question, Kenneth Allen. We're going to end up trading a second or third for Fournette now that his guarantees have been voided, right? After all, the first thing out of Zim's mouth after halftime was we need to run the ball more.
That was really frustrating to hear that Zim said that coming out of halftime. Like, really? Dude, you're running the ball at like 2.3 yards a clip. Like, I get like after the Patriots game, you know, you're saying we should have run the ball more because you're running the ball at like freaking 9 yards a carry, right? Like, okay, I get it. That historically that doesn't hold up. Teams that run like 9 yards a carry, and specifically teams that run 9 yards a carry, and also after you get rid of their biggest run are still running over 5 yards a carry. Those teams perform in the second half. So if that's your first half statistic, those teams in the second half perform at league average running the ball, right? So there's not really much of a relationship between running the ball well in the first half and the second half. But I get why you would say we're running the ball at friggin' 9 yards a clip, make them stop us. When they stop us, we'll figure out how to throw the ball. But in this game, it's like the opposite, right? Where you're running at like 2.3 yards a carry, and you're like, well, we got to run the ball because otherwise how are we going to have a big run? Like, I guess, man, but you got to like win. And that was frustrating. They're probably not going to trade for Leonard Fournette, but they're not going to like invest at the running back position. So look forward to that.
Let's go with that. Also from Kenneth Allen, now that the season is over, how much truth is there to the oft-repeated claim that Rhodes was the worst of the starting cornerbacks this year? So who had the worst performance? Rhodes, Waynes, Hughes, Hill, Alexander?
All the That's tough, and I wish it wasn't, right? Because Rhodes is kind of the darling of that group, right? Because he gets paid so much. He's made a couple of Pro Bowls. He's been kind of the way that they've kind of designed the back end of the defense was because of him and Harrison Smith. If I take a quick look at the numbers, which if this friggin' page would load, would be nice to see. I can take a look at some of the stuff that can help us like kind of learn who they are as players. Holton Hill ends up with 0.9 yards per cover snap, which is really impressive. He had 2 really bad games, if I recall, and a couple of really good ones. He was targeted a ton against the Bears. He did suffer a couple of penalties, but he does have like kind of the best passer rating when thrown to. I would say that Hill kind of doesn't count. And so you're taking a look at Trey Wayne, Xavier Rhodes, Mackenzie Alexander. Second half, Mackenzie Alexander was the best corner out of all of them. But if you count the first half of the season, right, then Mackenzie Alexander is the worst, and not by a lot. Trey Waynes and Xavier Rhodes have very close yards per cover snap, very close NFL rating allowed when thrown to. Rhodes allowed 1.1 yards per cover snap. Waynes allowed 1.06, so Waynes is slightly better in that category, but passer rating when thrown to, Waynes allowed more. Yards per target and stuff like that. So he had a passer rating of 95.4 when thrown to. Rhodes had a passer rating of 88.4 when thrown to. Those are things to take into consideration. Both allowed 2 touchdowns. Both had 1 interception. But, Waynes allows more yards on the targets that he was given. That said, Rhodes was given the most difficult assignments. And so, he's the guy covering, Kenny Golladay, right? He's the guy covering Devontae Adams. And so, Waynes has the opportunity to cover like Marquez Valdez-Scantling, right? Or TJ Jones, right? Because Marvin Jones was gone. And they had like another Jones after that. But yeah, TJ Jones, sure. But yeah, so like Waynes gets that opportunity, and sometimes teams have significant differences in the quality of their first receiver versus second receiver. So with that said, I think Rhodes did perform better than Waynes this year, but it also makes more sense to be like frustrated with Rhodes because he should be performing more than just a little bit better or more than marginally better, given the differences in pay between the two and investment. And second, Waynes felt like he was more available throughout the season than Rhodes, or at least when he was unavailable, it wasn't like a surprise. Like he'd be missing at the beginning of the game and you could deal with that. Rhodes ends up playing more snaps in coverage, right, than Waynes does. And so he actually plays more snaps than Waynes does, but it just feels like because Rhodes' injuries would just occur in the middle of games, that his injuries were like more frustrating. So I can understand being more frustrated with Rhodes. I'll say Rhodes played better than Waynes. The difference is not as large as it should be. And then in the second half of the season, Mackenzie Alexander kind of outplayed them all. Holton Hill, really impressive performance. Kind of excited to see what's coming from him going forward.
It almost seemed like Xavier Rhodes was on some sort of a pitch count during games, and like somewhere between the third and fourth quarter is when his number was up. Be like, okay, now it's time to go down. Just stay down for a little bit. You're not being benched. You're not being taken out. You just aren't effective this late in the fourth quarter, apparently.
Right.
It just felt like that considering how often he went down in the third and fourth quarter. Also, how does Arif Hassan always find himself in the crosshairs of 2 diametrically opposed groups? Those who think he's too negative and a Vikings hater, and those who think he's an apologist who defends their failures too much.
I mean, the self-aggrandizing answer is because I have the nuanced take and I take the middle ground, which I actually hate the middle ground fallacy, but I don't know, I just fight a lot. It's not so much like, yeah, I don't think so. Obviously, I don't think I'm too negative, or I don't think I'm too much of a homer, right? So I think, maybe that's part of it. And I tend to get drawn into fights with people who are on either one extreme or the other, which I think a lot of people who are kind of in the middle ground when it comes to the Vikings don't get drawn into those fights. And so that might be part of it, because I just kind of attract that kind of attention because I, use it. But I think also like part of it is that very often after games, I'll have not the opposite take, but I think a different take than a lot of people have on what just occurred in the game. And maybe that's because I'm anticipating kind of what an exaggerated version of the take is after a game, and I want to kind of backstop against what the exaggerated version of that take is, right? And so, if after a game Zimmer coaches a poor game, right? Like, and this is maybe a good example against the Bears game, he coaches a poor game and it feels like it's a reflection on the season. I want to say things like, I'm not going to say Zimmer didn't have a poor game, but I think that talking about Zimmer as the only problem in the game is, too shallow or naive, or doesn't, discuss kind of the full thing. And so every time, a problem occurs in a game, I kind of want to diminish the impact of that problem. And that makes it so that I'm arguing against people who I think have maybe the right approach, but are kind of more extreme in that approach, or want to have kind of the singular take. And I don't like blaming one thing for a problem. At the same time, on the flip side, when things are going well, I don't like crediting one thing. And so I don't know, maybe that's why. I just like to fight too. So, that was my New Year's resolution. This is the first resolution I think I performed admirably in accomplishing.
Well, you certainly were not resting on your laurels on that one. You went right to work. So let's go with David Bailey, who asks, which QB ends his career with more playoff wins, Cousins or Bridgewater?
Jesus. And Bridgewater did not have a good game.
Watching him scramble, I did do the whole clutch my chest. Is he going to be okay?
Yeah, right. Yeah. Hard skipped a beat. He had three good plays, but mostly it was just oh wow, he's playing nervous. He checked down there. He's not going deep. There's an open guy there. Boy, he's playing the version of the people who don't like him. Mm-hmm. Cool. I
like how the announcers actually made a point to call him Teddy Two Gloves during the
okay, that's funny.
During the performance. During the game.
Cousins is going to win more playoff. Well, by the end of the career?
End of the career.
Win first. Okay. Screw it, Teddy. I'm not going to be held accountable for this take. Well, now that I said that. It's Teddy's younger, man. Cousins has, 0 playoff wins, right?
That is accurate.
Yeah. Teddy also has 0, I think. Right, because they made the playoffs and then they didn't. It was the Seahawks game, right?
Yep.
But he's way younger, and he's going to get an opportunity, I think, with the team to start. And I think he's going to find himself probably in a good situation. So, and maybe that team is the Saints, right? And if the Saints winning the Super Bowl means that Drew Brees retires and Teddy takes over as the quarterback of the future, then I'm a Saints fan, and I hate saying that, but that's how much I like Teddy. But in that situation, I would expect them to do really well because the Saints have a pretty good team. I don't know if you've heard, but they do all right.
Mm-hmm.
So then it would be Teddy. I don't know. I just feel like he's going to be put into a situation that's going to be a little bit better. And I think Cousins is going to be in a great situation for the next couple of years. But I think after his contract is over, it's going to be very difficult for him to find a place where he can win a playoff game. So I think over the course of the career, it's going to be Teddy, which kind of presumes that he's going to start for 3 years somewhere. But, the first one to win a playoff game will be Cousins.
Next question from Brett. Which Vikings free agents will be back next year?
I don't know, man. I'm going to guess it's Anthony Barr, not Sheldon Richardson. I'm going to guess that they're going to nail down a long-term deal for Trey Waynes to kind of reduce that cap hit. They've got a couple of restricted free agents. I think they're going to sign most of them. Yeah, there's one guy who just got Anthony Harris. He's coming back. So those are my answers. I'm going to have an article that's going to go into much more detail on this later, but my brain is fried from talking about what happened, and I haven't had enough time to focus on what will happen.
There you go. Let's go with Vikings 29 Beast, who says, why would you guys like to see something similar to what the Chiefs did with Mahomes and draft a quarterback after the 2019 season, have him sit behind Kirk for a year, and then take over once Kirk's deal is over?
That would make for like another layer of like interesting Kirk Cousins, Alex Smith comparisons, right? But I really can't answer this until we have the 2019 season, which obviously that's a cop out. But like if Kirk is playing like out of his mind, right? He's like throwing 4,500 yards, 40 touchdowns, 5 interceptions. He's throwing like 8.5, 9 yards an attempt. I mean, no, but if he plays like this year, then yeah. I guess if I were to predict how he's going to do or how I think the Vikings should handle having him on the franchise, just kind of predicting 2019 and his career trajectory, yeah, I guess so. Yeah, draft a quarterback in the first round to sit the 2020 season and then figure it out from there. Which, I mean, and it could be like a Paxton Lynch situation where the guy that you drafted in the first round to sit behind a quarterback that should be a pretty good teacher, just isn't cut out for it. And it's better to know beforehand, like the Broncos did, than afterwards. So, yeah. Given what I think the trajectory of Cousins' career is, I think so. Because he's going to be 32 by the time the contract is up, and he's going to be a mid-tier quarterback. You can either upgrade with the guy that you drafted without having for it to cost much, or you can pursue another quarterback in free agency. So, yeah, sure. That's as it stands now until we know about the 2019 season. Sure.
Makes sense. Let's go to Alex Goebel, who says, "Hey gents, augmenting the offensive line is always a hot topic at the end of a disappointing Viking season. I've heard the argument that big investments in the O-line through draft stock or free agency money isn't worth it, given their relatively low importance or low value to win percentage. I think that makes sense in a vacuum, but is it possible that we should be viewing their importance with a sliding scale given how Mike Zimmer likes to win games? No one is questioning that he builds a solid defense, but can we fully utilize our coverage unit and our pass rush if we can't force teams to ease off of their Jordan Howard or Chris Carson arsenals by putting up at least 14 points before halftime?"
That's an interesting way of putting it. I think that the diminished value of offensive linemen, when you take a look at like wins above replacement and stuff like that, is a product in part of the fact that offensive line units are as good as their weakest link. And so the differential that you have in offensive line play can maybe mean more than the total investment that you put in. And so if, you've got 5 weak spots right along the offensive line, then you need to invest. You need to invest a lot because you're going to hit, 40-45% threshold where it's impossible to make your offense go. And it's going to kind of change, the way that offensive linemen impact wins above replacement or anything like that. I think if you've got 4 good offensive linemen and 1 really, really bad one, you don't have to invest a ton in order to fix it, but you need to do something because you're wasting your investment in the 4 other ones. So I think kind of in a vacuum, generally speaking, individual offensive linemen don't impact wins that much. But I think it kind of depends on the contour of the offensive line and, like you said, maybe the nature of the team. I don't know if the context of the way that Mike Zimmer likes to win games is as important, unless, we're talking about running the ball on the offense, in which case, offensive linemen maybe have a bigger impact on yards per carry and expected points than running backs do, in which case maybe, the way Mike Zimmer likes to run a team. But I think in the context of like they specialize in pass defense and attack the run on defense, I think that is maybe less important. Like I don't think it's as important to develop an offensive line so you can score points and force teams away from Chris Carson and Jordan Howard. I think, if teams are in a situation where they want to run the ball, fine. Like whatever. But I think that the investment of the offensive line is something that they should engage in, even though it is in theory like a low win probability kind of approach, because they have so many weaknesses there that it is putting them across a threshold where, maybe investments in the offensive line are non-linear in terms of how they impact wins, right? Because, going from Trent Williams to Tyron Smith or, an average left tackle to Trent Williams or something like that, Maybe that doesn't increase your wins all that much, but I think going from like TJ Clemmings to an average tackle increases your wins a lot more. So it might be a nonlinear step in wins, and the Vikings are at a point where they have to take steps, I guess, to avoid the problems of having a significantly below average line. And so in this case, I think investment matters, but not because the way Mike Zimmer likes to play defensively, but more because of the nature of the offensive line as a whole and the fact that offensive line play may have nonlinear changes in win responsibility.
Kyle Slaby asks, it's been less than a day into 2019. How many Twitter fights have you gotten into thus far?
I mean, I haven't started any new ones. I've continued the ones about Mike Zimmer. Not even that much. I mean, most people have just been fighting in my mentions, and I've just been not doing anything about it. But yeah, I haven't started
enjoying
any new
the
ones.
Chaos that it created. Yeah.
Yeah. You throw out a take as crazy as the head coach should not be fired, and the head coach with like a .594 record should not be fired. What a crazy take that is. The head coach who, since he's joined the league, has led a team to the 6th best winning percentage across all teams since 2014. That take that he should not be fired. Crazy. I threw that out there. It was bait. Some people took it, I guess. I don't know why this is like bait, but some people are like, I hate him. He should go. I wasn't even that inspired to fight. I just ended up fighting.
They just don't like people with one eye.
Yeah, that's very prejudiced. It's Leela and Mike Zimmer.
Mm-hmm.
Can't stand him. But yeah, I don't think I've gotten any new fights. Tomorrow's a new day, though.
Yeah. Well, I'd say new day, new you, or new year, new you, but that's not really what we're going for right
It's
here.
clearly not. Yeah.
No. Also, what are Arif's playoff party plans for Saturday night? Does he have a 12th man cake in the works?
No. Are the Seahawks playing on Saturday night?
Yes.
Who else is playing Saturday night?
Oh, God, really?
This is important that I not watch them. Seahawks Twitter is living in my head rent free. I'm sorry. Colts Texans. Oh yeah, I'm watching the Seahawks Cowboys. Okay, that's way more interesting. I mean, they're not playing at the same time, but if I'm gonna get football on a Saturday, it's gonna be the evening one. My Saturday night plans are to watch it in a bar, probably.
No, just a nice hoodie over your Russell Wilson jersey.
I don't have any Seahawks jerseys, and we can keep it that way. The only Seahawks jerseys I want are a Percy Harvin one, or
Googling,
or maybe a John Randall, Kevin Williams. Those would be good too.
You can still find Harvin jerseys. You can find a signed one for $86.99.
That's a bit much.
Hey, you're a medium, aren't you?
Well, I mean, Twitter tells me I'm a smedium.
Yeah, about that. Bill Botke. Hey, we haven't heard from Bill in a while. While what ifs are sort of pointless, let's pretend that Norse Code is an episode of Black Mirror with multiple possible endings. The Vikings go back in time and draft guard Will Hernandez rather than Mike Hughes. How does the season change, and what horrible ways would they still manage to rip out the hearts of Vikings fans like myself?
I mean, if they draft a guard instead of a cornerback, then they get more cornerback injuries. That's just the way of things, right? That's how they rip your heart out, right? Like, they decide to go with the guard against their better judgment, and they don't get a cornerback because no cornerback falls to them in the second round. So they get Will Hernandez and Brian O'Neill. Fan base is really happy that they've decided to invest in the offensive line in the first 2 picks, and then Xavier Rhodes and Trey Waynes go down. Terrence Newman retires, which that still happened, and Holton Hill gets suspended, and so now you're left with Marcus Sherrills and Mackenzie Alexander, but remember he's bad for the first half of the season, and Jaron Curse. Yeah, so either way, you'll have Mike Hughes' absence. That's what happens.
And there ends up being a tiff on the sidelines between Adam Thielen and let's say Will Hernandez and Kirk Cousins in there, and one of them ends up getting killed because that's how Black Mirror works.
That's how it works. Yeah. At some point, it's someone's fault for staring at their phone too often.
Yes.
Yeah.
Kirk Cousins made the mistake of finally going into his mentions. Robert donated to the show, and I missed his note, either the last show or the show before. Robert, I love your show, and like many others, I rely on you for insights on the Vikings and life in general. Aww. But you missed an opportunity to enlighten the masses when you were asked about the difference between aioli and mayonnaise. While aioli
Robert was very passionate about this. Yes. Fair enough, Robert.
While aioli has often come to mean garlic mayonnaise, this is just a bastardization of the original Catalan sauce. Let's go with that. I like garlic mayonnaise, but it isn't aioli. Real aioli is simply garlic, olive oil, and salt crushed together with a mortar and pestle to a creamy consistency. It is powerfully garlicky and not at all thick like mayonnaise. Give it a try, especially if you're not a fan of mayonnaise in any form.
I mean, first of all, you should be a fan of mayonnaise. Second, that sounds delicious, Robert.
We can we'll have to arrange something at some point. As the whole like New York thing goes, I wasn't a big mustard fan, but I ate mustard on like everything that was happening there. Maybe it just has to be one of those like, all right, well, I'm over here. I'm in a situation like I don't like it's not ginger that comes with the with sushi, but it's the horseradish stuff, the green stuff. For some reason, it's
the fake wasabi.
Yeah, it's the fake wasabi. Thank you. Yeah. Like, I don't like wasabi, but when I was eating at Dusty's restaurant, I was gobbling it up because I was being polite, but B, I'm in a situation where the food is much better than I am as a person. So let's just go with it. I have had aioli before and it was delicious, but maybe it just has to be a situation of being out in that sort of situation. Okay, well, I guess we're eating mayo tonight. Don from Ohio. Fair to say Cousins became 2016 Sam Bradford by midseason?
Not really, because I think Bradford got rid of the ball quickly when he was throwing short, whereas Cousins would wait. Yeah, so there's that. Cousins also does have more athleticism than Bradford, but I guess he declined to use it. So maybe from the perspective of what they did on the field, it's pretty similar. That's not a terrible, sad comparison.
I mean, I don't hear the violin already playing.
Right. Also, Bradford did throw so Cousins had one of the shortest depths of target in the NFL this year, second or third shortest in the NFL. Bradford was like first by a mile, so there is a difference. Yeah,
Bradford was barely like throwing to the line by the end of that season. Just get it out of my hands. I don't care. Also, who would be on Arif's short list of offensive line coaches we should bring in?
I don't know enough about offensive line coaches to really have kind of strong opinions on it. Someone suggested the offensive line coach that the Jaguars got rid of, but honestly, they were 1 rank better in pass blocking efficiency and 4 ranks better in expected points generated in the run. So that doesn't seem like a great solution to me. I guess I take a look at some of these staffs that are fired and figure out kind of who had a good offensive line. Offensive line coaches that are good are very rare. Like Mike Solari with the Seahawks, that's a good recent new find. But for the most part, it's just really difficult to find. Maybe Mike Tice, if he's willing to come to the Vikings, which, I mean, it sounds like he's not. But that would be dope. But other than that, I don't have a ton of names. It's going to be part of some research I'm going to do going forward for an article I'm going to write about where to go forward from here.
And finally, James, was it worth making a deal with the devil so you could finish second in the Norse Code Fantasy Football League?
First of all, we finished second.
Yeah, it was all of us, including the fans, as we determined last week. Was it worth the destruction of this Viking season and your stepson becoming a cannibal? Yes.
Absolutely.
Why is this anyone's like? Why is there any sort of confusion? I did end up winning the other league that I play in with the team AP and the Stick of Truth, and I've always said that if I end up winning, I have to change my name. So I have to think of something more clever than AP and the Stick of Truth. That's
that can't be too hard.
I enjoyed that one. Whenever I screenshotted that league, I always got a couple of replies like, really, dude? Well, you have to remember that I say off season. That regular season was just annoying as hell, but you needed some way to get through it. Yes, it was in fact worth the destruction of this Viking season, and my stepson turning into a cannibal. Yes, I'm totally fine with all that. So, Arif, you just wrote an excellent piece. What was it about?
It was about a lot of what we've been discussing about kind of what went wrong in the season. I go on a unit-by-unit analysis, talk about the quarterback, talk about the offensive line, talk about, offensive play calling and stuff like that, talk about some of the stuff that happened on defense and special teams. It's 3,500, 4,000 words, I don't know. When I sent it in to my editor, I felt really bad because it was already a little bit behind schedule. And he was like, I'll just quickly publish it. And he kind of looks at it and he's like, oh, okay, well, cool. But yeah, it's over at The Athletic. It's about what went wrong in the season, and it gives me kind of the foundation to write about in the future what should go right. So yeah, head over to The Athletic. It's one of the pieces I'm pretty proud of because it took a lot of work to get there. I wrote it basically through the night. I stayed up all night Sunday night to write it, and then I stayed up all night Monday night to write it. So yeah, head over to theathletic.com and check it out.
All right. So that is going to be it for this episode. Again, we're going to be going to once a week, once every 2 weeks for a little while, and then kind of drift off until a little closer to draft time, and then into the training camp season. So that is going to be it for this episode. Again, thank you guys so much. This season has been really fun, despite the way that it ended up ending for the Vikings. But between some of the really fun games, the trip to New York, meeting some of our Norse Code fans, and interacting with you guys over Twitter, over Facebook, email, donations, everything. Thanks, guys, so much. Really do appreciate it. So for Arif, my name is James. Thank you guys so much for listening. And this has been a work in progress. And we will see you later. Norse Code is the largest and only division of Norse Code LLC. You can find Norse Code on the Daily Norseman, SB Nation's Vikings blog at dailynorseman.com. You can also find it on iTunes, Stitcher, Google Play Music Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever fine podcasts are aggregated. Our Vikings blogger extraordinaire and generally useful human is Arif Hassan, and he can be found on Twitter at Arif Hassan NFL. I am your producer and co-host, and my name is James Pagashnik. You can find me at the show's official Twitter feed at NorseCodeDN. If you'd like to donate a few bucks to the show, you can make your one-time donation at paypal.me/NorseCode, or a recurring monthly contribution can be made by visiting patreon.com/NorseCode. Any questions or comments that won't fit in a tweet can also be sent to norsecodepodcast@gmail.com. On behalf of the Norse Code staff, we thank you so much for listening.
Our formula is this. We go out, we hit people in the mouth.